What a bunch of beautiful faces out there. Look at that. Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the B-Side session on Michigan Music Festivals. I'm John Sinkovich, editor and publisher of the localspins.com website, and we're tickled to be back again as part of the Michigan Music Alliance's mission to educate, inform, and support the state's musicians and the music community. And tonight, we certainly have another distinguished panel of experts and organizers of music festivals here who are joining us remotely. And they're excited to share their wisdom and their concerns when it comes to music festivals unfurling here in 2021. So to set the stage a little bit, back in December of 2019, before the COVID-19 pandemic literally changed the world and shut down the lion's share of music, we hosted a live in-person B-side session on festivals at the Listening Room in downtown Grand Rapids. And we packed the place with musicians and other folks interested in the subject, a lot of festival people from all over the state. It was robust, it was entertaining, and it was a great information session. But frankly, we were completely unaware at the time that festivals were going to be completely shut down the following year, and how a virus of all things would upend those plans. And a lot of us who were there that night certainly didn't see that coming. Indeed, that virus is still wreaking havoc. The music scene and a fairly large number of Michigan music festivals have already canceled for 2021, partly because of safety concerns, partly because of uncertainty regarding the capacity restrictions that the state might be handing down, or what might be lifted by that point. But other festivals are moving forward in mid to late summer, and maybe in the fall, and hopefully some of them are, some of them aren't. Consequently, much of our discussion tonight will focus certainly on how COVID-19 has altered the festival landscape, and what organizers of these ambitious events are doing to ensure they can either proceed safely, or what some of the organizing challenges are, even if they're not. It's a focus we didn't consider until now, obviously, but festivals are literally one of the most popular subjects that Local Spins covers from year to year. There's a lot of pent-up demand for live music. I think we were talking before we went on here that a lot of people are already starting to move into live music, and some of them are following the rules and some of them are not. And so there's definitely keen interest in tonight's webinar. So thank you everybody out there who's joining us here online. And we're going to introduce the panelists here for a minute. Seth Bernard, a musician who not only founded the Earthwork Music Collective, but also hosts September's annual Earthwork Music Gathering outside Lake City. John Crissman, owner of Shagbark Farm near Caledonia and founder of the Cowpie Music Festival. Emily Lively, who started Northern Michigan's LivelyLands Music Festival with her husband, Robert, after working at South by Southwest, which is maybe the largest music festival in the universe. Carolyn Barlow, a folk musician and talent buyer for the iconic Bliss Fest Music Festival, which unfortunately had to cancel its event outside Harbor Springs for the year. And Jake Robinson, founder of the Hoxeyville Music Festival in Wellston, amid the Manistee National Forest, and longtime music promoter Luke Sass. So thank you all for being here. I want to start by having you go around and introduce yourselves again, and then tell us a little bit about how COVID pandemic has altered your world in terms of hosting a music festival, and what the plans might be for 2021 and trying even moving forward, or why perhaps you've decided to take a pause. Let's start with Seth.
Hey everybody, glad to be with you. I was thinking about that session last year, John, right before I got on. It was like, wow, time has really taken on a whole different character. But that was really wonderful. And like you said, we didn't know what we had in store. And our case right now with Earthwork Harvest Gathering. So I'm a lifetime musician and grew up on Earthwork Farm. We started the Earthwork Music Collective and the Earthwork Harvest Gathering at the same time back in 2001. And so where we're at right now is not knowing. We're on the far end of the festival season. So we've always, not known what kind of weather we're going to get, for example, being like after Wheatland. And right now, we put out a statement on social media and on our website a couple weeks ago, basically saying we aren't going to make an announcement for at least a couple months. We're just going to sort of track where things are at. And it's too soon to tell for us being in September. But one of the things that we have asked is for our department heads to do some research and prepare information about how they would handle their department if we were to do it. So we've gotten some really interesting feedback that way. But yeah, glad to be here and curious to hear what everybody else has to say. It's nice to see you all.
Before we move on, how many people are involved with organizing Earthwork Harvest Gathering every year?
So we have about 50 people that are involved in, we have like a Slack channel and an email thread, and then we do monthly, usually we would do monthly potlucks, but now we're doing like monthly Zoom calls. And so of those 50 people, we might have about 25 on a typical Zoom call. And then there's like another sort of pool of people that have been involved in supporting the festival or the gathering over the years in different capacities that we like to lean into for bigger decisions, from like longtime attendees to longtime people who've played on the stages to donors, sponsors. Try to bring all stakeholders to the table. But yeah, we got a nice crew of people who just kind of show up, to have the conversations that are needed throughout whatever year we're having.
I guess that just sort of shows that even for a festival like yours, it takes a lot of people to pull it all together. Carolyn, let's talk to you next a little bit about what's happening with BlissFest.
Yeah, hi. I'm Caroline. I'm the talent buyer with BlissFest, and I do want to recognize that Jim Gillespie, our founder and longtime executive director and artistic director, is now retired. So we're all taking a new spin with an executive director for this last year. Her first job was to unfortunately cancel BlissFest last year, and we again have had to do that this year. And I'm not a part of the operations team at this moment, but of course, after the cancellation last year and again for this year, all of our programming has been virtual. So my job in my first year as full-on talent buyer has been to curate online content. That has been a beautiful way to connect with people around the world and around the country, but it certainly has been a challenge to get the spirit of BlissFest through the screen, because we're a festival as well as a year-round nonprofit, and people are very much attached to their experience at the festival farm. So that's definitely on our minds and in our hearts as we're programming to honor the past and the site, and also like look to the future. So we're open to connecting and collaborating with other organizations as we try to maintain our organization. I'm thankful to still have a bit of a role here, and I'm not going to go away, and BlissFest will certainly not go away. The organization wants you all to know that, even though we won't be gathering by the thousands this year. So we're online and this summer, like I said, I'm not a part of the operations team, but they do have some exciting announcements on that front, but it won't be a festival.
What, in your view, and maybe you weren't privy to all of the decision, but what was the biggest factor in deciding not to move forward in July?
You're right. I was not a part of that conversation, but from my perspective, a lot of it was the timing. Certainly, we're just to not be confident in what we would be seeing in July. And as a lot of the organizers know, you have to make decisions pretty early on contracts for artists, for example. People are needing to make plans, and with the county and a lot of health regulations, it takes generally a year to plan for a festival. So to not know even now or in a month would be really tough, especially for a festival of our size. So we're just not able to make it happen, unfortunately.
And how many people are we talking about attendees for BlissFest?
Yeah, about 4,500 attendees, and then we have 1,000 volunteers and artists. So there's about 7,000 people on the property at some point. But
all right, Emily, let's hear about LivelyLands.
Well, we're really fortunate in that we're kind of in the infancy of our little festival. Like you said, I went from working from one of probably the biggest festivals in the world, to moving back to Northern Michigan and operating one of the smallest festivals in the world. We maxed out our last festival about 200 people. We have a very small lineup. And we kind of did that intentionally. We wanted to intentionally have a small event for local people or people who wanted to travel to the region. So because of that, I feel pretty comfortable saying that we're able to move forward, and we're moving forward as, you know, we had planned for 2020. I think that's really lucky. I also have the luxury of having a festival manager who has worked for South by Southwest in the past in all of their safety protocols. So we have a really good small team of people kind of working on figuring out how to make it a safe event, regardless of what's happening at the time. Obviously, if something major happens, we're still open to canceling, but right now we're planning to move forward with about 200 to 500 people.
That takes place when?
That takes place at the end of August. So we moved up a weekend this year. We had been the last weekend in August, and now we'll be the weekend of the 20th.
Jake, as far as I know, Hoxeyville at this point is planning on moving forward. So talk a little bit about what organizers have looked at for that festival and where things stand in terms of how you guys hope to be able to process people, and whether or not there's something new you're going to have to put into place in terms of safety precautions.
Sure. Yeah, John, there's going to be a lot of different things. I mean, it's obviously not going to be the old Hoxeyville. So we're moving ahead with, significant reduction in capacity, both on our day traffic and campground capacity. And programming is going to get, as a result, kind of greatly reduced too. So kind of condensing those portions and then stretching out the site plan and implementing a ton of new health and safety protocols, which will, really transcend all departments, but obviously security is a big part of that compliance for us.
When you talk about limiting capacity, how do you know? Obviously, the state right now, we were talking a little bit that about 1,000 people is really what people can have outdoors right now. So is that your plan, to have 1,000 people? Or obviously, if the state opens things up in July, let's say, you'll sell more tickets?
Yeah, no, our plan is definitely to go with what we think is kind of a projected mandate. Obviously today, if we were to have to go next month or a month and a half from now, it wouldn't conform to that. But yeah, so we're hopeful with the vaccine rollout and as things progress, that things are going to look better towards the end of summer. Obviously we had to postpone Camp Green Sky, which is early June, which, as painful as it is, was, I think, the right decision. And so we're trying to make these necessary adjustments, and then again, like you said, just play it as it comes here. We're here in Northern Michigan, at least last year in the heat of this, we were under different requirements, for example, than you guys in Grand Rapids were. So we're sort of going with that intent that it seems like as things start to open up and the vaccine catches up, that the outlook looks better, at least for the end of summer and early fall.
Yeah, for those who might not know, there are different zones in Michigan set up as a result of COVID and the restrictions, and different zones are allowed to have different capacities quite often. And so it is a little bit uncertain right now as to where that's going to end up by midsummer. But John, Cowpie takes place in August too, just like Hoxeyville, but you guys have decided you're probably not moving forward. So what were the decisions that you guys had to make, and why hold off for another year?
Just the logistics of putting it all together without knowing exactly what was going on, and being in a more populous area, it just didn't seem like the safe thing to do. And plus, when you're booking bands and that kind of stuff, they want deposits and everything else, and that all happens October, November of last year. And so the money to put out for that kind of stuff, not knowing whether we were going to make it or not. The first one that we canceled in 2020, most of the bands, we just let them keep the deposits because they did their part and it wasn't their fault. And that was our way of helping them. But yeah, there's just the financial aspect of it, and then not knowing whether or not we could do it safely. Compliance is like I was talking just to you guys earlier and stuff. Compliance is a little tough, getting people to believe in the thing and believe in the vaccine and believe that we can get through this without being pricks. And that's what you got to do.
Yeah, I mean, requiring people to wear masks, for instance, outdoors in the summer, there certainly are going to be people who are probably going to resist that. How many people help organize your festival every year, John, in terms of volunteers? And
well, volunteers at the festival, we've probably got about 125 or so. But as far as organizers beforehand, it's my son-in-law and daughter, mostly myself, and then we have a crew of about 25 people who each had different areas of the place, the grounds, the wrangling the volunteers, backstage, you name it. Everybody's got their different stuff that they do. And
so for all of these festivals, it's an incredibly ambitious undertaking when you talk about the number of people that are required to not only just do some of the basics like booking and that kind of thing, but also just actually having to handle the festival that weekend is also a problem. But I want to talk a little bit about the booking aspect. You mentioned that some of these bands are being booked in October and November. So Jake or Seth, or how do you manage, especially you guys are dealing with a lot of local and regional acts, but there are some national acts involved as well. And the one thing I have talked to some major promoters in this area is that they have make their decisions based on who's touring. And if these people aren't going to tour until the fall, then there's no way you can put together on a major event, which makes me wonder how Electric Forest could possibly happen in August, and we'll see what happens there. But I think that's a concern. So how do you deal with the booking aspect? Any one of you?
Well, myself, we just didn't go through it because of the uncertainty of everything. That was a major decision as far as whether or not we were going to do it or not. If we might very well possibly do what we're going to call a slice of pie, and it's going to be a 1 day, 3 or 4 bands, no camping, and in and out. And I think that we can safely do something like that. There's been a lot of interest with local bands for that, and West Michigan is loaded with talent, so I'm not worried about the quality of the show. And so yeah, we'll do something like that.
So Jake, when did you book your bands? Or I mean, headliners, a lot of them have to be booked early.
So some of it, John, was some of that contract process that Caroline pointed out earlier, that a few of them, or a lot of them, are carryovers from last year. And then the rest of the process kind of hit the ground running in the last 60 days, I guess, essentially. But, for 90 days, honestly, we were in like a weekly hurry up and wait, right? What we thought we were going to do on Monday compared to what we thought we were going to do on a Friday, was completely different. And so that process, after a couple months of doing that over the fall and winter, it became clear that it was best to kind of wait it out, certainly wait for the new administration, the vaccine rollout, and see how some of these things went before we base that decision. And, we're, like Emily pointed out, we're bigger than her thing, but we've always kind of been on that micro end of things too, where even at our biggest shows, it's been like a 2,500 to 3,000 person capped event. So to us, on a 200-acre parcel of ground, it seemed feasible to do this with, under today's circumstances, even though the mandate is different for the mass gathering, that we think as that changes, that we're all used to wearing masks and social distancing, and we feel like in that version, as far as the show plays and operationally for the show and the campground, that can be done safely.
I've also talked about the fact that it is easier in a lot of cases to book regional and local acts as a result of this, because they are more flexible. You can probably wait a little bit longer before you have to actually nail them down. Luke, you've been a longtime promoter. You had to deal with the Founders Fest and dealing with some national acts, coming up with guarantees ahead of time. I'm assuming that that's always a concern because you're forking over money before the ticket sales or vice versa. And is a local and regional acts a better option maybe at this point? You're muted. I think.
Yeah, that's funny. I knew I was going to do that. Like Jake, for us, a lot of the stuff would have carried over. Unfortunately, this past September, I was laid off from Founders. So I've been transitioned to my trade, which is in the construction industry, drywall, doing quality control and assurance. But for us, as far as I know, it's just going to be continuing carrying over until they decide to get back after it again. What's cool is that this didn't just affect one area, one person, one band. This affected the entire globe. So everyone, from my experience, seemed to be in the same boat and was interested in finding the best way forward so that all deals could remain, because who knows if that might be the only deal that's there. Unfortunately, the things that make me extremely sad is that the money's not being pumped in. So as places close and festivals go down, there's going to be less and less opportunities. So if you had a contract out there, you had a deposit in, that's a good thing. You had good faith there. You had good relationships with those agents, and they know that they eventually, when it can come back, everyone wants it to come back. But for something that's smaller, that's what really makes me sad. I had the benefit of having a large brewery behind me all those years, so it was very easy to do some of that stuff besides making cases for the budgets and having to the dollars make sense, that kind of stuff. So that wasn't the biggest concern for me. So it was nice in my end just to see those cooler heads prevail. Everyone was very interested in seeing it happen again at some point. Now that it's been postponed again, canceled, I'm not sure what the future of Founders Fest is. I don't know how those contracts will play out, but I've kind of been advising them, from the bench there, and hoping someday I get called back into the game. If not, Jake, holler at your boy. But it's just my fear was that I was going to start tearing up a little bit on this thing, because I'm seeing all the people that that make the world so happy, and knowing that folks don't have things to look forward to like that. And it's changing. Obviously I've got a new puppy and I've got a great garden and stuff now, but I want to get back to dancing and so to get back to your original thing of booking. I think anybody's excited to get a phone call these days if the money's there, and if you're willing to continue to hold that out and you're not asking for it back constantly. That's a good thing too. I know for some of our regional and local acts, we did have our festival completely contracted out, so we had pushed to maybe some New Year's events that we were going to transfer those deposits to, and then we kind of just ended up letting everyone just kind of take care of, take it and just keep it in their pockets.
So for those who are new to the festival game, and I know there were some folks who were on hand back in December of 2019 who were just starting up festivals, and then of course things fell apart due to COVID. I would like each of you, and we've got 5 people who are involved with festivals now. 2 of them are moving forward, 2 of them are not, and 1 of them isn't sure. What is the biggest pitfall or the biggest mistake that someone can make in terms of organizing a music festival? Someone jump in.
That's the $1 million question, John.
Assuming that what you love is what everybody loves.
Yeah, there's a myriad answer there, but I don't think there's any one thing. I couldn't point at any one thing, but as anybody here on the call could say, that a lot of foresight and planning is sort of the foundation and the base of it. But I think just good intention and trying to do business right and just do things honorably. I think just like in life, if you can do business like that and put your events on like that, treat both your fans and your staff and your artists like that, I think you've got a winner then. And regardless of how it comes out on the ticker tape, as we all know, that's you think you're having your best day until you're having your worst. That's just how it goes. That's a big function of the business and the risks involved in it.
Brooke, I like that answer. That's a very real concern, not having enough porta-johns. When you brought that up, John, I had like a bunch of things flash in terms of problems that we've had, but I think the most important thing is taking safety seriously. And like, that's kind of the gravest error that you can make. just sort of assuming that everything's going to go smoothly and that everybody's going to be cool, but really being prepared to make the place as safe as possible for the people who are most vulnerable. And then to be prepared to support people if they're having a hard time. Working with a safety team that's trained in de-escalation is really, I think, really important. De-escalating situations. And then making it safe for women and girls. Like it seems obvious, but it really is so important. And I think that that's probably something that needs to be said over and over, especially by men to each other in terms of putting on festivals and events. And yeah, so it's like, you know, it's important to acknowledge that sometimes these things have a darker side, and people have had traumatic experiences at festivals in addition to having peak experiences at festivals. So let's try to like focus on harm reduction and plan for that, plan for safety, in addition to planning for, you know, peak experiences.
I think that I have to echo the safety and just not underestimating the cost of doing it right. You know, I saw that somebody asked about hiring security, and making sure that you have somebody that knows how to de-escalate a situation, who is not there to attend your event, but who is there to protect your event. I mean, I think they're really important. We always make sure that we have a female security officer. If we can hire, it's not always an option, but so that we feel like we're protecting our attendees. And I think that this year is going to be even more of a challenge just with the added COVID safety necessity. But yeah, I think, and not underestimating that cost, because there is a cost that comes with having a safe event.
We have always hired security for our events. We used to try to do it in-house, and sometimes that's a lot to put on a volunteer. And so we hire professional security, and then we have other professionals to deal with situations as they come. You know, not everything is a throw them out type of a deal. And so, yeah, we do hire security and then have other people ready to step in when needed.
Obviously, it's one key element that I find, you know, I deal with it from the media perspective in terms of security, in terms of, you know, where I can go, where I can't go. But a well-run event always has rules and always does a good job of enforcing those rules with the people that are on hand. And I think that just everybody understands the rules when they go in. And I wonder how it's going to work now with COVID, because some people have just gotten to the idea that they're flaunting the rules because they're making a political statement. And I wonder how scary that might be for a festival organizer. And I also wonder about the weather. I've always said that if you're going to organize a music festival, and John, we just talked about the mud that happened in 2012. I was there. I remember it. The problem I have is that if you're organizing a new music festival and it rains the first year, I feel like you've really sort of torpedoed your chances for continuing, just because it's hard to recover and get that momentum going, because it takes a few years. And I know I talked to Seth about this last year. It takes several years to really finally become break even or profitable, or at least know what you're getting into.
It does take a lot to recover. As some of you might remember, I took 2013 off because of 2012 and the cost of it all. It was a big cost, but also I had crooks for partners, and I ended up fronting the whole tab. So I didn't have enough money to do it in 2013, but I had enough moral support. I had some folks that ponied up some money to get things started for 2014, and we brought it back, and it's been great ever since 2020 or 2019, I mean. And we'll be back again.
So someone posted as well, we were talking about the safety factors. Some festivals have a safe space harassment policy. Do you folks have those?
Is that where you can go to harass somebody, or where you can go and make sure you don't get harassed?
We actually do have a women's safety policy written into our event management plan. And it's really funny because when we brought it to our board of locals, they were like, what are you doing? Why is this important? But then when we shared it with the local sheriff, they were very thankful that we had the foresight to put that in there and, you know, think ahead in that way.
One experience I've had, with the Electric Forest, where I've worked in multiple capacities over the years, from production to working with artists. They have their Her Forest there, which I always thought was a great spot, and it's a place where people who identify female are able to camp together. And there ends up being a great kind of tribe that comes out of that, and a good protection circle there too. And it's extremely large and positioned right near the front gate too, so it gets a lot of visibility, and it's also near their ADA section too, so they get a lot of the same benefits and protection and security there. And I always thought that that was a wonderful idea that I would like to see expand a little bit there, and just kind of a designated safe space, because some of the experiences when you're working late night at festivals aren't always pleasant, as Seth had alluded to before. It's not all about peak. It's that's what you hope. And just like in life, you hope for the best, and there's some bad things too. And anything that we can do to mitigate that is fantastic. And I'm really excited to be sitting on this panel now with two females that are working at festivals and running them and kicking ass at it too. That makes me really happy, because the last time we were lacking that in representation. So thanks for joining the panel today.
Thanks for the shout out. I think it also takes, men and all people supporting people to lift each other up and to create that safe space. I think we really, as leaders in the organizations that we're in and festivals, you set the tone for what's accepted and what's allowed and what's going to fly. And if you ignore an event that goes down, that people remember that. And I think it's really important to, like I said, to set the tone and for people to know what's okay and what's not. And so thank you all for lifting our voices and for being a place where people know what's expected, of them, because most of us are there for those beautiful peak experiences. And unfortunately, it's the minority that really has the loudest voices sometimes and cause the scene, right? And that's not what we want at our festival. Like I said, I don't speak on the operations staff anymore, but I used to manage the volunteer crew at Bliss Fest. And, it took years for us to really, develop those skills and develop the eyes and ears. And the Bliss Fest community has really been big on everyone being your eyes and ears, but we also have a hired security team. So it's everyone's job to do it, but at the same time, it's not just a volunteer's job to stop something. So we definitely have those in place, the tier of authority. So we never put that on the shoulders of the regular festival goers or just a volunteer to stop a really intense experience. So that's my bit on that.
Unfortunately, and further, I was just kind of thinking about, just say overall safety. Back in 2020, we had, I think it was 2017, I threw our 20th anniversary party for the brewery, and that was coinciding with the Las Vegas incident that happened out there. And I was about a month after that. And at that point, not only was it beneficial speaking with, the police and finding out, what they thought could be security holes, but we were getting things like cement bollards and placing, water, big water tanks. So if someone tried to drive through the festival, and that's kind of another thing that's, lurking out there too, besides COVID, besides individual and personal safety, is kind of the overall safety there. And that's something, as this all comes back, I'm hoping that we get those cooler heads that prevail, and that, we don't find ourselves with a mass gathering being something that's targeted again. And I'm just kind of curious, how that's going to be something. Again, I don't want this to be but how we all go about making sure that those sort of things don't happen. I mean, that's very far out there, and you just plan for the worst and hope for the best. But I just hope that the world isn't like that, once we get back to it and once we get everybody going. Do you guys feel that that's something that, is a big concern, seeing some of the recent things that have been happening, or?
It certainly has been for us, Luke. I mean, since, like you said, that season that happened, same protocols you're talking about, really, whether it became a vehicle as a weapon or a mass shooting or a bombing or any of these scenarios that we like to think in northern Michigan or wherever we are, we're insulated from, seem to be getting closer and closer to home. And so, yeah, we've certainly taken active steps there to have the right safety team, security team in place that, God forbid, if we have to deal with something like that, we're equipped to. But yeah, like you said, it's a very scary reality, unfortunately, that we all have to face. But I think all the best pre-screening and things like that, and then just like I said, great on-site security that are, we do a lot with off-duty and even some engagement with on-duty law enforcement for that purpose, just to make sure that something were to go sideways or something were to happen, that we'd have some help right there immediately.
We usually get 2 or 3 drive-throughs by on-duty officers in their cars during any event that we have here. And that is by request, and they love to come in and just see what's happening. But just their presence is enough that hopefully it'll make somebody think twice about pulling something. I remember one time one guy said, "What are you letting the cops in here for?" So what happens if I tell them, "No, you can't come in"? Then what? Well, what do they have to be here for? And it was just a cluster, but it's like, no, welcome them in and have them pull through. Maybe they're part counselor, who knows? And it's not a bad thing to have them come around and be visible, and it's okay.
Yeah, I was mentioning the panel that I've been working in construction. I was working at the Michigan State Police forensics lab that's being built here in Walker, Michigan. So I've had a chance to spend quite a bit of time with some of the officers there, as well as the staff. So it's been interesting to kind of hear their point of view, because they work at Electric Forest Festivals. For folks who have never been, they are the hired security for the festival, and it ends up, in my opinion, being a great way to bridge a gap. What I always loved about festivals, that you put up a big tent, you just invite everybody in, and you hope for the best situation. That's all parts of the community, and inviting the police in gives them a bit of sense of community too. They feel like they're there to do their job and to support it, and they also get to show off, that there's positive things that you can expect from them as well. And I know that they really enjoyed it. So same with Founders Fest, when we would hire the local police, they would say it's their favorite day of the year. And that made me really happy, to know that I could give them one day where they're not just waiting for that radio to ring. And I'm sure they still were, but, hopefully provide them a space where they can just have a good time and do some community engagement. And in this conversation, I was thinking maybe here's a positive thing that comes out of it, is all of us have these spaces where we can form some of those spots where people can engage with, the police force again too. Maybe start to repair some of those things going on.
Seth, I didn't know if you wanted to make a comment at some point. It looked like you were going to say something.
Yeah, I'm a ninja with that mute button now, John. I've got 12 months of just hard training with the Zoom session muting it. I still mess it up all the time, but anyway, Brooke asked a great question and I posted in there. But I wanted to touch on safe space, and our previous safety director, Buddha Weatherby, who's worked with many of you, he had for years suggested that we have this blue light system that's similar to what they have on college campuses. And we finally implemented it. And it's basically having spaces across the property. So for us, it's kind of 3 spaces on the south and middle and north ends of the property, where there's always someone there on staff, and it's always a safe space. And then in the night, there's a blue light on and it's staffed. And so that's been really helpful. We have what's called a people care tent up on the north end in the farmers market. We have a women's tent and a healing and wellness tent. And these are places that are always staffed, and there's always a kind of a quiet place for people to go. there's also a safety presence there, but it can also just be kind of like a place for people to cool out. But I want to touch on this this like more serious question, which I think is really great that it got brought up, because you know, like exactly, we're talking about preparing for the worst. And what I've learned is that the gate is such an important place to have a serious safety and security presence. And in some ways, you know, you could spend thousands of dollars having, you know, trained security professionals throughout your whole site, but if you don't have really good security at the gate, things can come in, and that's where things metastasize from there. So we really have realized and been, you know, advised to have like trained professionals at the gate, as well as a wonderful welcoming crew of people, because it's both, right? It's like you come in and you feel relieved, like, oh, you just got to this festival. Like I just drove to Bliss Fest, and the people at the gate are happy and they're welcoming me. But if you have ne'er-do-wells, people who are coming to cause trouble, catching them at the gate is so great. And I feel so proud of our gate team, because we've been able to retain much of the same staff every year. So we have gate leadership that trains volunteers. Everybody takes it really seriously. There's a culture there. It's a culture of welcoming everyone and keeping this entire thing safe. And we take it really seriously. So that's just something that I've learned over many years, you know, having these safe zones 24/7 for the attendees and taking the gate safety really seriously. And I know that y'all do that as well.
That's great advice, actually, because that is the first place that you're going to see people and spot whether or not there might be a problem. I want to turn to the musician side of things now as well. You know, the first time we held a B-side session on festivals, the goal was to give artists concrete information to navigate the more daunting aspects of being a self-employed career musician. And we got a question here that was sent to me, and says, as a young artist, how do you break into the festival circuit as a fresh new talent? And I would think that that's even more difficult now, because there are fewer spaces to play, with maybe half the festivals taking place. So anybody who has any advice for musicians who are really trying to break into the festival scene, because it's actually a great scene in Michigan.
Practice, practice, practice. And also play the local bars around where that festival is, and just get as many gigs as you possibly can, and get seen and get heard. And there'll be a festival promoter out there somewhere listening who might like what you've got going on and actually might hire you.
Yeah, I think that's certainly a great question, and it can be really hard because it feels like you get lost in the shuffle. And I know sometimes sending an email isn't always the way to get booked, and it's hard to get heard. But one of my favorite ways to be introduced to people certainly is by hearing them live, or a recommendation from a friend. And sometimes it's not like, I'm not going to say it's who you know, but join in the network of the festivals, and even like volunteering or just getting involved in the festival that you might want to play at our level. You know, I can't do that for Bonnaroo, but in our community, you know, we're all really tight knit. And so I think if you begin to get involved in that community around, or if you're down in Grand Rapids, go hang out at Founders, you know, at open mic, and I might ask Nick James, like, who's your new favorite person right now? You know, a lot of us kind of share information like that. And I think it's cool to be the up and coming new person. A lot of festivals save room for that. I know Bliss Fest really cares about emerging artists. So that's one way to do it. Brand yourself as that emerging artist, and get us to see you live in different scenarios, I think.
You know, one way that I have discovered people through Harvest Gathering is that they volunteered, especially like emerging artists show up, pitch in, really like demonstrate that they're serious about community in action. and then I'll just hear them. Like sometimes people will come and they'll set up fence ahead of time, and then we're hanging out around the campfire later, and it's like, wow, you can play. There are some people who are like amazing on the scene now that I first heard hanging around the campfire at harvest gathering, having volunteered in the kitchen or in the first aid tent or the volunteer tent, whatever it is. And so that's two things. It's like, okay, this person is showing up, not like knocking on my door wanting something from me, but they're showing up to support what they say that they think is awesome. And then they can actually play too. So it's practice, practice, practice for sure. Like, spend less time worrying about your career and more time playing music and like working on the stuff that you have a hard time with. Like maybe it's that F chord that you've been avoiding. Like go right after the F chord. Don't play any other chords except that one for a while. But also, yeah, just show up. And it really is about relationships, like knowing each other. And probably that way in everybody's business, in John's business, Luke in construction. It's like these are real relationships with real people. And so like getting to know people and having people know you is great. I remember I had a mentee who was like, man, I really want to work with this guy. And we were at his house doing a house concert. And I'm like, well, go do his dishes. He's got a sink full of dishes. Don't wait for him to tell you what to do. Just see something that needs to be done and do it. And then the guy whose house we were at is like, what's up with this kid? He's doing my dishes. I'm like, yeah, he's a real worker, And then next thing you know, they're working together. So yeah, see what needs to be done and do it. That really helps. And don't be too precious to do that, right? Like we need musicians going door to door for clean water. We need musicians pounding posts, all the stuff.
I have to jump in real fast. So I noticed Kanan is here in the comments, and I recognized her because I was her stage manager at the Spread the Music Festival virtually. So here she is, showing up, right? So now, and we've already communicated because I want her to play street music in Harbor Springs, which is not Bliss Fest, but it's another opportunity. So that's something that we love to offer is, if we can't offer a festival, we have other events that we can do. So here we are building this relationship. And so just showing up. So we're going to start seeing your name in different places, and Sean Miller is really great at that. He'll pop up and then you start seeing Sean everywhere and you're like, okay, what's this about? Not in a really fun way. So this is what's beautiful about community is we get to know each other this way. Anyway, I'm excited to have her at Street Music, but I do have to give her a date. So I owe her a Facebook message after this.
Yeah, that F chord is the reason why I stuck to keyboards, Seth. So actually, though, Kanan actually asked a follow-up question too, and that is opening for other bands and acts. And I always encourage artists to not only hook up with bands that they love and talk to them. And if you like what they're doing and they're great at it and they're playing festivals, and you want to do that, sit down and talk to them. I mean, they're usually very good about it, and ask them how they went about doing what they did. If it's someone who you respect in terms of the professionalism of their approach and the way in which they approach their music as a business, those are the bands that you want to emulate and follow and be part of. And that gets you into that community, and maybe you'll end up opening for this band. And the next thing you know, you're going to end up, at an opening slot at a festival. I also think it's important. A lot of smaller festivals will have open mic nights or an open mic stage, which gives folks an opportunity just to sort of strut their stuff at a festival. It kind of makes them feel like they're part of it. And I think that's really important too.
Yeah, I think something that everybody underestimates is how accessible people are. And I bet right now, if you think about it, no one really has anything going on. So if you hit up some of your favorite musicians, some of your favorite bands, all those people, you might get a reaction a lot faster than you would have at other times. I know that anybody that, I'm not in a position where I have the money to put out there anymore. I don't have the dates for shows, but everyone's been very interested in continuing to talk, to continue those friendships. Hopefully I build those relationships to where they know me as a good person. And if I have a question like, what do you guys have going on down in Texas? Or, is there a festival down there? Because I don't play, but let's say I want to go and work for another festival or start my own festival. Like you have to have these relationships there. And I think that's kind of what everyone's saying is being a part of everything. But also now if you're quarantined and we can't go out there and be with folks, try sending a Facebook message. I think you'd be surprised at how fast people respond to that one. There's a good tip for you guys. And if you're ever looking for a booking agent, go to the band's Facebook profile.
Anyone else comment on this in terms of helping out a younger band, a younger act?
I will say too, I think looking at the festival, the scope of the festival, what kind of artists are they booking? How many slots do they have? I think my biggest challenge is I only book 8 to 10 bands total, for the whole weekend. And so I wish I could book more. I wish that we had the capacity for that. But we don't. So I second it, showing up. I think showing up helps a lot. In fact, I've offered bands that I wanted to book just free tickets, so that they could come and check it out. And also I think working with other artists, that's such a smart comment, because just looking, I haven't been in the music industry or music scene in Michigan very long recently, but at least there is a huge group of just good friends, and they're always bringing in new artists and the way they work together. And then you can kind of see these friendships. They either create a new band or they create other gigs for each other. And especially with LivelyLands, watching artists now that made friends with some of our artists from Austin and are from Michigan. Now there's like creating some gig opportunities back and forth between that. So I think just obviously networking, but yeah, and also looking at the scope of the festival and seeing what they have to offer and where you might be able to fit in.
Yeah, attend the festivals that you are interested in, the artist and the lineup. I think it's interesting. Before COVID, Local Spins was keeping track of Michigan music festivals, and there were more than 120 music festivals in this state, all taking place essentially within a 5-month period. Now, of course, it's more limited, but the bottom line is there's still a lot of new festivals being created and a lot of people who are really serious about it. And I think there are places to find if you just start by looking at the Michigan Musical Festivals guide at Local Spins, and you'll see all kinds of opportunities to at least check out these festivals, check out their lineups, and see if it fits in with your kind of music, whether it's heavy metal or folk. There's definitely a place out there in terms of Michigan's festival land. I wanted to touch base on something that's always been a mystery to me in terms of music festivals, and that is the finances. It is not cheap to necessarily put on a festival. You have to depend on a lot of volunteers. You have to sell tickets. You have to pay the bands. You have to pay security. We've talked a lot about security, and of course, that's probably going to get even more expensive now with COVID protocols. And obviously, some of these festivals are smaller and they're not having metal detectors and that kind of thing, but there's fencing, there's licenses. This is not for the faint of heart, in my view. So the question is, how do you run a festival and make money? Or do you go into a festival and say, I'm not going to make money, because that's not what this is about? Somebody jump in.
I had a mentor tell me that if you want to go into a festival, take a wad of cash and throw it off the top of the building. If you're okay to do that, then you can probably create a music festival. It's really, really hard. We haven't made any money yet. We've spent a whole lot more than we've made. We're on the 5 to 10 year plan. We're hoping that if we continue to show up and we continue to engage with our community and we continue to book people that we really love, and that we will succeed. In fact, we're gonna pay if we were going to move forward with this festival. And so that's one way that we've kind of decided we're going to try to revive ourselves, because we lost a whole year without income.
Yeah.
Go
Go
ahead.
ahead, John. You first.
All right, well, you're all very familiar with the term. It takes a lot of money to make a little bit of money in the music business. And so, yeah, don't plan on making money for at least 4 or 5 years, probably. Don't quit your day job. And anytime you can. I saw somebody say that they were writing a grant for a festival. So try to get some grant money, get volunteer money, get sponsorship money. Lots of different avenues that you can use to do that, because there are the fixed costs. A band costs what they cost. Security is what it is. The porta johns, you got to have them, and they're not free. All of that stuff. And so, yeah, just try to get as much sponsorship as you can, and you've got to have a bang for your buck for the sponsors, and just work it on that angle.
I guess, guys, to me, it goes back to an earlier question about maybe what the most important thing here is, and it's kind of coming around to this, which to me has been, budgeting, and just, that's such a huge part of the financing, is not only understanding your own budget and your own expenditures, but also what your market can handle and what your market cap, kind of your speculative market cap is. And, I spent a lot of time fumbling around and not really looking at the right indicators and listening to the right people early on in my career, until I got to a point where that information became very valuable, because we were, not making money year after year, and it just becomes frustrating. So, I think that's a very delicate piece, because there's no magic bullet there for everybody, and everybody's situation is different. But I think by and large, just knowing where all your nuts and bolts are and having them accounted for, and really have very finite contracting and budgeting, is a great place to start and a great foundation.
Yeah, totally. And Brooke, your question is great, and it depends on so many factors, like what Jake said, like how many people are you wanting to have, how many days. We've put together a one-day event for 10 grand. We've also realized with harvest gathering, and this is something I think everybody here can probably resonate with, one of the most painful things is having to raise your prices, right? Raise the price of the ticket, raise the price of what it costs to be a vendor. This is painful for the attendees, but a lot of people get it. A lot of people are like, we understand, we want to support, we want this to be supportive of the farm. And you have to do that when you host more people. And exactly, it's just more everything. It's more porta potties, more golf carts, more fence, all those things. But yeah, getting some people in to counsel you is really, I think, really helpful. And so, paying someone like Caroline to be a consultant, or Emily, like someone who's done this many times and has thinking of things that you just don't have the experience to think about. And I think permitting is really important. And some of it is like way less complicated than like you might fear it to be, but it's important to do in a good way. Insurance, like festival insurance is a thing. But I think that it's really important to, plan ahead and try to manage your expectations, but like have some wonderful goals. And like, we're in this for like long-term cultural work that's just wonderful for our children and for everybody. Like we're trying to make a better culture here. And like, if you can keep track of that intention, it'll help you through the most painful parts of trying to put on a festival, because it's wild. And then that said, like if you're doing something that the community values, the community is going to show up for you, and like help you through some of the growing pains. We talked about how hard it was to figure out. We were so much younger in the early days too, and so now we've sort of like learned from our mistakes for a lot of years. But we were really lucky to have these festivals that were like our uncles, our cool uncles. Bliss Fest, huge inspiration. Wheatland, I grew up going to Wheatland, Hiawatha, Spirit of the Woods, these things. So we had like actual festival mentors, but then people who are part of those things, like Luke said, like we're a pretty accessible community. So there's people around that you can talk to advise you.
I would also have them with you on site or whoever those people are. My world changed at BlissFest, not only when I started having more people around me, but more people that could really do a task without a lot of direction, or if really understood what you were after, because it's really hard to organize something and know how you want all the different pieces to go. But if you're the only one that knows how that goes, it can be really frustrating, because when it's actually on the ground, you're not going to be able to be in all of those places at once. So really have a team that you trust, to either be able to make decisions based on what they know, or have them organizing from the start. Yeah.
So I'm curious, in starting this, how many of you folks set up nonprofit organizations to actually host the festival, or have LLCs set up for this reason? Because I think that's an important thing that people need to know, because I know if you have a nonprofit, you can seek foundation funding and grants, and quite often if you're a private for-profit firm, you really aren't, that's not really not available. So how did you guys decide to set up your organizations?
Earthwork Harvest Gathering is an LLC, but we work with various nonprofits as our fiduciary for charitable stuff that happens at the farm. So Earthwork Farm is also host to the Skill Swap Weekend, which we do with Crosshatch Center for Art and Ecology. They have been a fiduciary for us so that we can have a raffle, for example. So like an LLC can't do a raffle license, but a 501c3 can. So that's another revenue stream that opens up, but that revenue stream is specifically for enhancing aspects of Earthwork Farm that contribute to charitable events. It being like a family business, we felt like an LLC was the best thing for my dad and I, in terms of like a legal shield for the farm. But then also I am part of a nonprofit now that comes and like does panels at Harvest Gathering, but it's a separate entity. But that was just our decision-making process. There's a lot of different ways to go about it. And we've actually gotten some grants as an LLC as well. The Michigan Film and Digital Media Office used to do a grant. They're not doing it anymore, but you can, if you look into it, you can find stuff. And that's like, Brooke, you're talking about a festival to highlight diversity, like that's your lane, that's a specific thing, and it is a cause. And if you don't have a nonprofit, there might be a community or there might be an organization in your community that you could partner with, and they could become your fiscal sponsor. There's also national organizations that you can work with, like Fractured Atlas, that will become your fiscal sponsor if you're in alignment with them, and they just take, I think it's 10%.
John, what did you guys decide to do with Cowpie?
We formed 501c3, the Michigan Heritage Music Association, back in 2004. And it has been a nice thing to have. It's opened us up to opportunities. You can get a liquor license when you have a 501c3. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but you can. And so yeah, that's what we did, was form that, and it gives us a blanket organization over the festival.
Yeah, so we're Hoxeyville Productions is an LLC as well, guys, and kind of a family run, operation. Just my wife and I as the principals, and there wasn't really any fundamental direction for that, other than that was, I didn't have any experience forming and running a nonprofit or anything like that, or grant writing. So in the beginning, 18-20 years ago, that's just how we approached it. But similar to kind of echo like what Seth said, we're and John, I guess, we're constantly working in different avenues and areas of the event, whether it's a nonprofit partner on the beer tent or different avenues for the kids area. We're always looking for opportunities like that. But it does limit, our fundraising adversely. So it's a check and balance, I guess, there. But and I don't have any context on not doing it for profit, so I don't really know there either. But I think they both have their advantages.
Yeah, prior to working, formerly working with Founders, I had my own LLC, and that was something that was advised to me from a lawyer friend who I had met at Electric Forest over the years. And I just always chatted with him about stuff that I was interested in doing, and he told me to come to his office one day and sat the paperwork down and submitted the fee for me, which I think was like $75 at the time. I don't know if it's much more affordable than you would think for all this stuff, and it's paperwork that you might even be able to figure out on your own as well. But to the idea of showing up, this gentleman had seen me lots of places, hopefully, putting my best foot forward, and took me aside and said, "Hey, do this. I'll do this for you, in fact, and good luck." And that kind of was one of the first things that really pushed me on to be like, "Oh wait, this is a business. Oh yeah, okay. There's taxes. There's things like that. Wow, and you can make some money maybe. Wow, okay, cool." And so that's the whole thing, is showing up and asking those questions to people that you think maybe wouldn't answer your question.
So one question that just came up, which I think is a very interesting one. Are there any tips regarding the concessions? Do you run them yourself or do you contract it out? I know John has had some interesting background in terms of concessions at other festivals. It is an issue. It is an issue whether or not you decide to sell alcohol, I guess, or let people bring it in, or whether or not you sell food. So how do you guys handle concessions?
Well, for our food booths, we just rent the vendors the real estate and let them do their thing. We found that if you like charge a commission or anything like that to vendors, a lot of times you'll just make a dishonest vendor. And so get your fee up front and let them come in and do their thing. We try not to do competing food. We try to do healthy food. But we want them to feel free to have their fun too, and not make it such a worry that they're going to make their consent or their commission to play. So yeah, we just rent that out. As far as the alcohol, we always ran that ourselves. And just because you gotta take responsibility with that right off the bat. I'm not sure how I would feel about having somebody else do it on my place, because the liability of all of it and whatnot, you want to make sure that you're in charge of what goes wrong or what goes right.
Yeah, we have, as the years have gone on, I've talked to Jake and Caroline many times about what their current policies are on a lot of levels, as the scene changes and we've experienced growth. It's sort of like, well, trying to find what the ballpark is in terms of what you would charge a food vendor with a certain size tent. And to just see what other people are doing. Not everybody has the same policies or prices, and not everybody has the same ROI that a person can get if they want to sell pizzas at your festival. But trying to get it in the ballpark in terms of like communication with peers is a nice way to do it. I will mention this when it comes to vendors. One of the things that we realized was just part of the DNA of Earthwork Harvest Gathering is it started out as the summit of people involved in food and farming and musicians. And so in the beginning, it was like there was no price of attendance. It was like pass the hat, and all these people are musicians or they're involved in food and farming. So we've always fed musicians really well. And the hospitality piece has been a huge part of Harvest Gathering for us. And then as the years went on, it sort of grew into like, how many musicians can we fit on however many stages we can build this year? And like, the budget for musicians, it was hard to grow, but we tried to make sure that the budget for hospitality was strong. So even if musicians aren't getting paid as much because there's 120 bands, they're going to get fed all day long. And there's a really beautiful space where musicians can hang out, because we know that musicians love to just hang out and have a great place to connect with each other. So for us, it was like, we might invest a little bit more in hospitality and have a little bit less for our production. But that's part of our personality of our festival. And like, everybody here does something a little bit different. And I think it goes back to like knowing what your values are and having a mission statement. And then early on, like, you could actually save so much money and time just by hiring a consultant. And I mentioned it again, I know Emily and Caroline have done this for other people, but actually paying someone to save you some pain. And then like, oh, I realized that I can have these practices in place. It really is advisable. I wish that I had done that sooner. But I also want to mention that it can be done. You can find a balance. It's not all pain and it's not all losing money. And I think that, like, for us, having the staff get paid really well has been so important. And that also creates accountability, and it incentivizes really hard work in a way that few other things can. If someone is getting paid, they're incentivized and they're accountable to do a really important job. And that overall just kind of raises the quality of work that everyone's doing. So like the heads of your departments, if they're happy and they're competent and they've done their planning, everyone who works in that department is going to benefit from it, and their overall team morale is going to be great. So we have a ton of volunteers too, like 500 volunteers. And we make sure that all of our department heads are in communication with each other before and during and after the gathering. And afterward, we always try to have a team roundup where we talk about what worked and what didn't. And we take extensive notes while everything's fresh. And so that we can refer back to the things that we need to work on and have those be the first things that we get to work on when we start in the new year planning for the next event. And we got a lot of time to do that now. Plan for what we can do better.
So I don't know if anybody else has anything to say about vendors, but this question that I just got popped up on the screen reminds me of the joke about the poor folk musician who wins $1 million in the lottery and says he's just going to keep gigging until the money's gone. So I'm hearing that festival planners are just as poor as musicians. That's what the question is. And she wants to hear from someone who shared the experience of their first year compared to their best year. And when things go really well, I'm assuming that's what keeps you going.
I'll say, just speaking to the, so I used to work for musicians. So if you want to talk about being really poor, but we had a good time. So it was awesome. And I learned a ton there. So yeah, you start out doing anything and it's ground up, it's, you really work as hard as you possibly can, and a lot of fast food, that kind of stuff. But it's been cool to see where it can take you to. I'm interested to hear Jake in particular on this one.
Well, the good years are just like magic, right? Like they should, like you hoped that they would feel like after so long of not having them feel that way. But that doesn't mean that they come so easily the next year or the year after that or 5 years after that. So I just think keeping your poise, staying fresh, and just keeping the vision is maybe the biggest thing, and not get discouraged. And never, ever, ever give up. Just keep grinding it out.
Our first year, there was like no anything. There was no staff. There was no budget. There was Soy Boy from Oriana Food Co-op with a giant tray of tempeh. Crazy Richard showed up, which kind of made it an official festival. Crazy Richard was there. We pulled up a trailer. We set up Dave Taylor's PA system, and we had like 4 or 5 bands and a bunch of people crashed. The second year, it was like, okay, well, that was an event. Like I did the thing that I wanted to do. How can we make it better? And that's when you have to sort of start to think about how can you keep a low overhead and low expectations, but still totally never give up and chase your dreams. And I think the thing that can be really scary is like if you have really heavy weather. So it's not necessarily the first year, but the year when you get hit with really heavy weather. And I remember the first year that we had tons of rain and very low attendance. We were surprised how many people still showed up in the rain, and we've had some really cold years too. But early on, when you lose money, and for us too, it's like me convincing my dad and his partner Susie to do it again, like even after like we went through something that was pretty adverse. And it's sort of like, well, we know what it can be like if it gets that bad. And that's really when we started to think about other revenue streams too, like sponsors. How can we bring sponsors in? And that's actually a really legit way to have another revenue stream, because a lot of these businesses, they want to be seen. It's a win for them to be associated with cultural events, with music festivals, with places where people congregate. And so, and those are ongoing relationships. So we not only got more sponsors, but we had this thing called the sponsors reception, where we had certain musicians come and play just for the sponsors. And we had like hors d'oeuvres from our kitchen, which is like part of the personality of it. So really trying to create a great experience for sponsors. And that's also when we did the raffle. So the raffle and the sponsors created a little bit of a safety vest, even if we were going to get some really heavy weather. And then knowing that we have like some hardcore people that are going to show up, even if it snows, which has happened. But yeah, it's a good question. And then the peak year, I would say the peak year, it's still like there's money at the end of the year and you can do stuff with it. And part of what has led us to peak years is communicating to our community what we need. Like one of our biggest years was when we needed to have a whole new roof on the barn. And it was like, here's where, this is sort of like the heart of where Harvest Gathering started, in our barn, and it's over 100 years old, and it's very expensive to put a new roof on it. We want to do it once and do it right. And people threw down. They're like, okay, we will help make this happen. And then we made it happen. And the next year everyone came and it was like, look, there it is. That's the new roof. We helped make that happen. And so it made people feel like they had skin in the game, which they do. So those are like some turning points, like how can we make it through the worst weather you can imagine? And then how can we involve the community in like making this cooler and them being a part of making it cool? And when that happens, that's when people start making it safer too. It's like, okay, I'm invested here. I helped put that roof on that barn. I'm going to make sure that this is a safe space. That's awesome.
One of the things your biggest sponsors are, of course, your customers, are your festival attendees. And the most important thing is to make sure that they get their money's worth when they come for their ticket price. And if you do that, that will go the furthest for making money and making things happen year after year.
Yeah, John, I've been there for your festival almost every year, and you get very emotional when you're on stage and introducing stuff, because you know what it takes to put this together, and you see how people are reacting to it, and they love going to Cowpie, and or they love going to Earthwork Harvest Gathering or Hoxieville or wherever, because they know that this is a family. And I think that's where that special feeling and that magic comes together, is when you go to a festival, you feel you're part of a family and you're experiencing the same things and you're getting a chance to see some amazing talent at the same time. I mean, what's not to like, right? So when things go well, it's great. And then when it rains, you sort of think about the good times and hope that the next year it'll go better. So I think that must be the way you keep it up. But I'd love to hear from Emily and from Caroline as well.
Emily, you go.
You go. Well, again, we've had 3 festivals so far. Our first year was a small pilot event. Seth was there. Caroline was having cheer fun weekend. We did it at my parents' farm that we kind of slid through permitting and maybe paid a fine. And so the next year we just had so much fun, we decided to get a little bigger and move it off of my parents' property. And then it poured all weekend. So we, experienced our pilot and then our first rain all. And I think the third year so magical was that I who really was helping our event and who was there to really see it succeed. And I leaned on those people. Um, and I would say that our third year, even though it was tiny, still was just very, I think everybody had a great time. The weather was great. And so it was that peak year. We've had a roller coaster, obviously. But I think leaning on those people who want to help and, letting them take some of the responsibility was probably one of the best things that I, as kind of a control freak, ever did.
It's really cool to hear a lot of the other panelists here are the founders of their festivals or organizations. And my experience is not in that. So I got to jump in at BlissFest in 2014, after already decades of a really beautiful, well-run festival that had a lot of spirit. And I was an intern that year. So you could say that was the first year, the best year, because I got to already enjoy the fruits of their labor, right? And I was excited, and my job wasn't really that intense, but I gave myself more of a job that year at the stage gate for the artists, because I had been working with Jim a little bit that summer. I'd been doing a lot of different things, but artist work was my main interest. And so I was just in heaven getting to meet the Ducks, one of my favorite bands since high school, right? So they're on the roster, and I'm just like, I can't wait to meet them. And I really felt like I was in my element, and that I was like, oh wow, this is maybe where I'm meant to be. I'm kind of cut out for this. And then, as nonprofits and worlds go, there wasn't a job for me in that, right? The next year, but I stuck around, and I became a board member. And then there was finally a job opportunity as the volunteer manager. Not my dream gig, but, with a dream organization with great people. And I certainly don't regret taking that opportunity to grow, because I wouldn't have the insight I do now about the festival world and the ins and outs of organizing. And I guess it's because I stuck it out that now I'm in my dream job as talent buyer in a pandemic. It's fine. But I did get to learn, from the founder, from Jim, and all of that, and kind of learning the spirit of BlissFest, and, now putting my own spin on things. But my best year at festival was the year that I feel like I finally had the tools I needed to get my job done. And 2019, I think, was actually that year. It was going to be my last year as volunteer manager. I had some great systems in place, but I also got to help program that year more than any other year. We had this Woodstock theme. And so I was just like left and right. Oh, we're going to get the Mammals from Woodstock and Amy Helm. And we're going to have Chris Miller sit in on the saxophone because he knows all these people. So playing that networking game for me was a blast. But again, my experience in this is different because I don't have the weight I feel. I mean, I do, but all the finances aren't all on me, the operations, the safety. I mean, I'm one of so many of the board and staff that are really keeping BlissFest alive. So I get to have a little bit more of a stress-free experience. But actually, I take that back. It's all stressful because we feel we feel it when we're all there, and I care about the end result for sure. but shout out to people who have started the things. And I hope that you all as founders can find people to help carry on your vision too when it's time for you to retire. I know that's hard to imagine, but BlissFest is 40 plus years down the road. We're still here.
Yeah, that's a good thing. We're
Yeah.
glad to see it. That I would love to leave things on a positive note because we got to wrap things up. But we have a question that I think is really important, and it sort of goes a circle from where we began. That is talking about the COVID pandemic. And someone asked the question: suppose your event becomes a super spreader event. Is there a way back from that? And how do you sort of deal with that calamity potentially if it happens? I don't even know if there's a way to react to something like this, but there are a couple of you that are planning on holding festivals this summer. So maybe I'll leave it to you two to at least say what have you guys thought about when it comes to that potential?
Well, I think that the legitimate reality is that, that's just as much, not just in the event, it's an everyday concern. So I think we're trying to apply some of the same applications and rules that we would or that we have during the last year. So in doing that, I think that we're hopeful that if people will comply, I think a lot of that burden does at the end of the day come down to the patron. So I think that security and COVID ambassadors are really going to help us execute that. But I think all those things have to work together, right? You can't really have three of the spokes work and one of them not, and have the whole thing function properly. So it is in engineering the plan, really doing a lot more than we think would normally be necessary to execute those things when it comes to safety and compliance and security. But again, it's, there's certainly risk. There's no doubt about it. But I think, making as many things and mitigating as many of those risks as much as we can, much as possible, is the best we can do and the best we can hope for.
One of the things that helped me moving forward, I was really thankful that there was another festival that kind of had the same thoughts as I did, and was willing to create that space. And I think we're going to do that in a much smaller way. We bought a 20-acre parcel, my family did, that we're having the festival on, and plan to operate it as a campground and event center in the future. So the possibility of having a super spreader event in the first year of that new business is also quite daunting. And I can't really say exactly how we're going to move forward because there are so many variables, but I can say that it is just important for us as an organization to pay really close attention to what is happening, use all of our resources, see what other festivals are doing and have done. I'm looking at places like New Zealand and Australia that are holding events, and just, do everything in our power to not only follow the guidelines, but to make sure that we're putting all of the protocol in place so that we're just not a super spreader event. In fact, I don't even want to view that as a possibility because we're just pretty determined that we're not going to hold an event unless we're pretty certain that it's not going to create a big super spreader situation.
Well, I want to thank all of you for your input. I think it is an amazing collection of people we've got on hand tonight. So thank you, Luke, John, Caroline, Emily, Seth, and Jake for taking the time. And I know that these folks are also very generous with their time as well. So if some of you that are listening in or maybe are going to listen to this program later, want to get in touch with these folks, you certainly can do that either through the Michigan Music Alliance, through myself, or through these folks directly. So thank you all. Good luck with your events, whether they're happening this year, 2021, or in 2022. But I guarantee you that Michigan's music festival scene will survive and will thrive down the road because of people like you. So thank you so much for being here tonight. And thanks to all of you who have listened in tonight. Good night from the Michigan Music Alliance. Thanks a lot.